so far we have factored out polynomials by the greatest common factor. And you always want to check for that when you're factoring any polynomial. But today we're going to look at factoring trinomials. And our trinomials, remember, have three terms. But the trinomials that we're doing today have a coefficient of x squared that is 1. So that makes a difference. So the technique is, if you're factoring something such as x squared plus a number times x plus a constant, what you need to do is you need to find two numbers that multiply to get the c value, so the constant, and then add to get the b value. So whenever I'm setting up these problems, I do two sets of parentheses. I do two sets of parentheses, and now I need to work backwards. So to get the x squared, you know the first term has to be x and x. Then what you need to do is look at what are factors of 12. So what's something that multiplies to 12 and adds to 7? So when you do this, you're thinking of, okay, numbers that multiply to 12 are 1 and 12. Now, it could also be -1 and -12, because those two numbers multiply to get 12 as well. And then you have 2 and 6, and -2 and -6, and 3 and 4, and -3 and -4. So looking at these numbers, you look at which of these pairs has a sum of 7. So this adds up to 13. This adds up to -13. This adds up to 8. This adds up to -8. The sum is 7. This is -7. So right here, this is where your 3 and your 4 are going to give you your answers. So it's +3, +4. And you can always FOIL it to check. Now every time you don't have to write all these factors out, but if you get stuck, that's what I would expect that you do. Okay, then number 2. So I have the coefficient of x squared is 1, so I can do factors of 30 that add up to 13. So it's +30. So the numbers either have to be positive, or a negative and a negative. If this number is a positive, I know it has to be a positive and a positive. So factors of 30 are 1 and 30, but that's going to give me 31. 2 and 15. When I add, that's going to get me 17. 3 and 10, 5 and 6. So it's got to be 3 and 10. So I do a plus 3, a plus 10. Another thing you can do is, if you get stuck factoring, you can make a factor rainbow. So what I do is I think of factors of 30. I start with 1 and 30. Make the rainbow. Then I do, okay, does 2 go into 30? Yes, it does. 2 matches up with 15. Then I do, does 3 go into 30? Yes, 3 matches up with 10. Then I ask, does 4 go into 30? No. Does 5 go into 30? Yes. 5 times 6. So once you're in the middle, then you're done. So that's another way that you can check all your factors. Okay. So, next one, number 3. K squared minus 11k plus 18. So I'm going to do k and k. So I want to find factors that add up, factors of 18 that add up to 11. So 18 is 1 and 18. You could also do -1 and -18. I know that the answer has to be 2 negatives because you're adding up to get 2 negatives. So I'm listing them out, but once you see the answer, which is -2 and -9, that's the answer. And you can always check by pulling it out. Okay, number 4. Factors of 42, it's positive, that add up to -17. So if this is a positive number and this is a negative, The two numbers must be negative because a negative plus a negative is a negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So factors of 42 are 1 and 42, 2 and 21. Does 3 go into 42? Yes. 42 divided by 3 is 14. To figure out if you can divide 42 by 3, what I did was I did 4 plus 2 and get 6, and if that number is divisible by 3, then that the entire number is divisible by 3. So 3 and 14. 4, no. 5, no. 6, yes. So the answers have to be 3 and 14, but I need to have a negative 3 and a negative 14. So I do d minus 3, d minus 14. So whenever you get stuck, make the rainbow. Okay, then number 5. Factors of negative 27 that add up to positive 6. If this is a negative number, it means that one number has to be negative and one has to be positive. So I'm going to do my m and my m. So what are two numbers that you multiply and you get negative 27? Well, it's not going to be 1 and 27 because the difference between the two numbers has to be a 6. So the numbers have to be closer together. Another two numbers that go into 27 are 9 and 3. So it's got to be some combination of 9 and 3. So what you look at is which one has to be positive and which one has to be negative. Well, in order to get a positive 6, 9 plus negative 3 adds up to 6. That's how you choose the sign. So number 6, I do C, factors of positive 20 that add up to negative 9. So these two numbers must be negative because a negative times a negative is a positive, and a negative plus a negative is a negative. So negative 4, negative 5. And then number 7, 2 parentheses. So I got P. Now factors of negative 18. So one has to be a negative and one has to be a positive. So what are two numbers that you multiply and you get 18? That have a difference of negative 3. So I'm not going to use 18 and 1 because that's not going to give me, that's either going to give me 17 or 19. So I do 2 and 9. That won't give me negative 3. I need to do 3 times 6. So in order to get 3 and 6, the 6 must be negative and the 3 must be positive because negative 6 plus 3 equals negative 3. Negative 6 times 3 equals negative 18. And then number 8, we got factors of negative 56 that add up to negative 1. So if you have a negative 1 in the middle or a positive 1, it means that the difference between the two numbers is 1. So those are consecutive numbers. So two consecutive numbers are 2, 3, 10, 11, 9, 10. Two numbers that go in a row. So I'm going to do one has to be a negative and one has to be a positive, and I know that because this is a negative number. So I'm going to do 56 is 7 times 8. Those are two factors, and it has to be negative 8 and positive 7. Even if you have two different variables going on, like the next two problems, don't let that mess you up because you're still going to do, in order to get the first one, you have v squared, and then now you have a w squared and a vw. So the last term must have a w in it. So I'm going to write, I know I have a v and a v, and I know I still have something with a w and something with a w. Now because this is a negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Now I need to figure out what those numbers are. So I do factors of negative 48 that add up to positive 2. So I must have a negative number and a positive number, which I already have out. So factors, two numbers that multiply to be negative 48 and add to be 2 are 6 and 8. So it has to, because this is a positive 2, it must be a positive 8 and a negative 6. So if I'm multiplying this, negative 6w or 6w and positive 8w make negative 48w squared. You can FOIL it too to check. And then the last one, I'm going to have m and m, and this is a negative, so I know one has to be positive and one has to be negative. And then I have this n squared, so I put an n and an n. And now I got to figure out what are two numbers that I multiply to get negative 60 and I add to get negative 17. So if I factor out 60, I got 1 and 60, rainbow, 2 and 30. So I could have a negative 2, that's going to give me 28, or a positive 2 is going to give me negative 28. That's not going to work. So then I do 3 and 20. That's going to work right here because I could have a negative 20n and a positive 3n, and that's going to give me negative 17n. So all of these, when you're factoring them, you definitely should do FOIL to check these out.